All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone, or evening or morning, depending on where you're dialing in from. So my name is Brian Vandeven, and I am one of the core developers for Bokeh, and we'll hopefully be joined at some point by Peter Wang. He's remote and I think having some network issues, so it may mostly be me driving the webinar today. But we're here to discuss Bokeh and give everyone a chance to see sort of what it's all about and see some examples and hopefully ask some questions as well. So the first thing I want to do is just make sure everyone can hear me, just to make sure that we're all connected. So if anyone's having any issues at all during the webinar, please let me know. And if a few folks could just make sure and in the chat indicate that you can hear me, then I think we'll go ahead and get started. Okay, great. It sounds like we should have connectivity. We're getting some people responding. So let's go ahead and get started. So the plan is I'm going to have a few slides to present, I think about 10 or 15 slides, just sort of talking about what Bokeh is, sort of the philosophy behind it, show off a couple of examples and talk about them. And then we'll dive into some actual sort of real live examples from the Bokeh examples. Source repository, especially maybe some of the server examples or maybe seeing it used in the IPython notebook, which is a little bit harder than just running a Python script. So, and then we'll open the floor for questions. Again, that's really the main point of today, is to sort of have an avenue for folks to ask questions about Bokeh and get those answered. So, without any further ado, getting started with Bokeh. So, the first thing I wanted to mention, just a little bit about Continuum Analytics. So we've been around really a couple of years now. Hard to believe it's only been a few years. Founded by, again, Travis Oliphant, the author of NumPy, and Peter Wang, again, one of the original authors of Bokeh as well. We're here mostly down in Austin, Texas, sort of spread all over the world. We do a lot of sort of work around, data and analytics, high performance and scientific computing, as you could imagine, and visualization is a big aspect as well. So we're fortunate enough to have some funding through DARPA to develop Bokeh and some other tools that we have, and it's really helped accelerate our open source efforts. We definitely are very committed to open source efforts, but it's certainly very nice to be able to have some funding to accelerate that work, so we're very grateful for that as well. So, what is Bokeh? So Bokeh is really a library for doing browser-based visualizations. I think that's probably what most people would agree, sort of where the future is headed. And rich clients will always have a place, but certainly there's a lot of interest in developing all kinds of applications in the browser, from the cloud, that sort of thing. And so Bokeh really targets the browser as a first-class citizen for visualizations, but also for interactive visualizations. And also, we wanted to be able to address some of the use cases in and around big data. And we'll talk about some of the features that are going into Bokeh to support that. And finally, of course, we're a big Python shop. We certainly use a lot of Python. And so Bokeh is driven from Python, but as we'll come to see when I describe the architecture, it's actually possible to write bindings for Bokeh in other languages as well. We actually have some Scala bindings that are preliminary and some folks interested in writing Julia bindings. I'd love to see bindings for Bokeh in as many languages as possible, but certainly our big focus and our big concern is Python, and so we'll show how to use that today. So another big key feature is that really without the JavaScript, sort of the postscript to that statement, right? We want to be able to do these interactive, fantastic, novel visualizations from Python, target the browser, without having to sort of delve down into the JavaScript level, without having to worry about that. That said, there is a first-class JavaScript library that's part of Bokeh, and that can be used sort of in a standalone fashion for JavaScript development as well. So it's very flexible, I think, architecture that affords a lot of different possibilities for use. The basic architecture for Bokeh is that we have this Bokeh.js standalone library that runs in the browser on the client, which is actually, I would describe it as a reactive scene graph library. So really, it takes descriptions of your plot, little bits of JSON that describe the types of things that you'd like to have in your scene. Is it a grid plot or a map plot? Does it have these kind of axes? Whatever tools you want to put on it. It has all of this descriptions of the plot, and it has some references to the data, and then it renders this scene for you. And so that's sort of what I mentioned, when any language that can generate these small little bits of JSON that describe your plot can drive Bokeh.js. We're starting with Python, but any language could do that conceivably. And so this is a very nice decoupled, flexible architecture. It allows us to interop with a lot of different things. We can have interactive plots directly in the IPython notebook, for instance. We can have plots that are backed by our Bokeh server, which can have, for instance, streaming or updating data or downsampling of very large data sets to present to the browser. So there's a lot of possibilities here with this sort of nice decoupled architecture. And again, Bokeh.js is a standalone piece. If you want to do a pure JS application, you certainly can use Bokeh.js, and I'd love to garner interest around that. But of course, our big focus is in and around Python. It's also a language-based tool, right? So it's really a library. It's about providing high-level expressions for being able to generate these plots that do the right thing most of the time, but also providing a low-level object library. If you need to do something more involved or more novel, you have the capability. So that's sort of, I think, the guiding philosophy behind Bokeh is to, have common defaults and sensible defaults and do the right thing, for the 90% case, but then express capability and expose capability if you need to really delve down into the details so that you can do some very interesting and very novel visualizations. We'll sort of take a look at some of those a little bit later. It's also, again, designed from the ground up to be interactive. We really want to be able to have features like link selections, link panning, link brushing, all of that. So we have a lot of work gone into Bokeh.js to support things like spatial indices and things that can support all of these nice features like linked panning and interactivity, zooming, and selections. All of that is baked in from the start. Obviously, as I mentioned, the browser, I think, is an important platform going forward. I think we'll all probably agree about that, and so definitely is our major target for Bokeh is the browser. Although conceivably, you could write another backend as well that again, accepts this plot descriptions and then targets some other rendering backend, but certainly our major thrust is the browser. And then finally, we want to support large data sets, and this is really going to be done in a combination of ways. One is through simple sort of downsampling, and this actually went into the previous release of Bokeh that just came out several weeks ago. The ability to have, for instance, several gigabytes or tens of gigabytes data cube that you want to be able to sort of interactively slice through and zoom into and have progressive refinement of detail as you zoom in or out. That's gone into Bokeh. It's still working on presenting some nice examples around that. We also have a line downsample function that went in as well. So, for instance, if you have 10 million points in some time series, obviously just displaying those in a plot isn't going to be very useful because you have more points than pixels. But if you can do some intelligent downsampling, that can help mitigate that problem. So that's definitely one of the support that we have in Bokeh as well. But beyond that, we have some really novel features that are coming that I think will be somewhat unique to Bokeh. We have an academic collaborator, Joseph Cottam, who's the original author of the stencil paper, is working together with us on the DARPA XData grant, and he's got some fantastic ideas for visualizing very large data sets, something called abstract rendering. And I kind of liken it to HDR, high dynamic range photography. It's kind of like HDR for data or data shading. And so it's really cool. That's going to be coming down the pike in just a few more months, and so we're looking for that. A few other things to mention about Bokeh. One thing is we get asked quite a bit, is it built on top of D3 or does it use D3? And the answer actually is that it does not. Bokeh.js is built from the ground up using the HTML5 canvas, and there's a couple of different reasons for that. One is that the authors of the library, myself and Peter and others, were sort of familiar from previous projects with this type of API, but also, in between sort of the very small data sets and the very big data sets, there's really a lot of sort of medium data, if you will. And for this, we wanted to be able to have a really good performance as well if you do want to sort of plot all the points. And so the HTML canvas is definitely quite a bit more performance in terms of that. You can certainly put up a few tens of thousands of points in Bokeh. Pretty sure if you did that in D3, since every element there is going to be part of the DOM, it's going to make things slow to a crawl. So that's the reason we chose Canvas. That said, we're interested in having, for instance, static output from SVG, and so adding, for instance, an SVG or D3 kind of backend is something we might look into in the future as well. As I mentioned, there is a notion of something called a Bokeh server, and I'll show that off a little bit later. And using the Bokeh server, which you can run yourself, we're going to offer a cloud hosting, but you can also run your own instance of the Bokeh server. You can do things like streaming and updating data. So, for instance, you can have data coming in from a real-time financial feeds or from some sensors, and have the data in this Bokeh server be updated. And one feature of Bokeh is that when the data source updates, the plot reacts. So I mentioned before it was a reactive scene graph. So what I meant by that is that when the data updates for your plot, the plot updates. And you don't have to worry about any sort of special code or hooking that together. If your data source changes, your plot will re-render and you'll see the new data. And so this is a really nice way to handle sort of streaming and updating data as well. We can also do lots of novel sort of custom visualizations. We have integration with Google Maps. We'll probably be adding integrations with Bing Maps and other maps here very soon. And of course, again, no JavaScript required. You can certainly use Bokeh.js as a JS library, but if you don't want to have to dive down into JavaScript, you absolutely don't have to. So you can see here on the right side of the slide, we can see some of the examples from our gallery. So you can go to bokeh.pydata.org, which is our main site for Bokeh, which has all of our docs and our gallery, the user guide, We're continually updating those. I think they're in a pretty good shape now. We're going to be adding some more information and examples soon. But you can go to our gallery there, and you can click on any of the plots that you see, and you can go to a live plot that's interactive, that you can interact with, pan and zoom and move around, and you can also see the code that generates those plots. And so we'll take a look at the gallery here in a bit as well, some of those examples. A couple other core concepts about Bokeh. If anyone here is familiar with the work of Leland Wilkinson, the grammar of graphics, I think it's safe to say that we're sort of heavily influenced by the grammar of graphics. To be clear, we're not implementing a grammar of graphics system, but we're definitely influenced by his ideas. And I think that the main idea is to have very tight composable abstractions at the low level that we can build, convenience and sensible things on top of. And so really at the core of Bokeh, we have this notion of a glyph. And beyond that, all of the visual elements of a glyph, like a circle or a rectangle or a star, all of the visual elements of this glyph can be tied to a data. So you can either give a single value, for instance, for the color of a glyph, or you can vectorize the color, the fill color, or the outline color across some other data column, right? And so you can have all of the circles have different colors or the same colors in this manner. Same thing for other glyphs. So we have a wide variety of glyphs, things like patches for polygonal areas and lines, multi-lines if you want to have a vector of lines that you splatter across the screen, of course, circles and lots of other marker types. So wedges and annular wedges, there's a ton of different glyphs. And so all the properties of these glyphs can be either specific values or they can be tied to columns in your column data source, your vector of data. And so that's, I think, a very powerful and unifying concept as well that sort of ties all of the stuff for Bokeh together. So I wanted to take a look at just a couple of examples, and we'll go to live versions, but I wanted to really highlight just what the plotting code looks like. So this is the plotting.py module. As I mentioned, there's a couple of different levels of interface in Bokeh. There's a very low-level object interface, so I'm not really going to dive into that too much in this talk. There's the plotting.py interface, which is what I'm going to spend most of my time on, and then upcoming in the next release, we should have some very, very high-level Bokeh.charts interface, which really is much more like a ggplot, auto-faceting, all of that sort of nice layout and being able to compose all many things together in a much nicer way. And so that's going to be an even higher level, sort of more statistical charting interface. But for this talk, we're going to sort of stick with the plotting.py interface, and you can see already that, it's not a lot of code to get, for instance, this chart here. So this is just the plotting commands for that chart, and you can see that we want to plot, for instance, all of the elements here as a circle with their atomic mass versus their density. There's this interesting periodicity in the sort of the sequence of elements you can sort of see. But we also want to fill the color together with their melting points, right? And so we can sort of see what the melting points look like in this interesting chart where we plot mass versus density. And so we want to splatter some circles. We want to vectorize some circles for this plot. So that's our first renderer there, is the circle renderer. And we've passed in atomic mass and density for the X and Y. For the color, we've passed in this melting point color, this a column of data for melting point colors. And then we have some other parameters that apply to our plot. For instance, the plot width and the background color and the tools that we want on the plot, all that sort of thing can go on this renderer as well. We'd like to have some labels, of course, for these different elements. And so for that, we can simply vectorize a text element. So here we, again, use the atomic mass and the density as our coordinates for our text, and we simply pass in the symbol as the text value. And so now we can get nice labels attached to or next to all of these different circles. A few last lines there, we decided to change, some labels, some axis labels, as well as some grid colors. We wanted those grid colors to be white. So that was done just to show some of the commands that are available. For instance, you can get a hold of the x-axis, the y-axis. You can get a hold of the grid and change its properties in this manner. Another example here, this is the result of a vector field integration, right? So we had a vector field, and we wanted to do a streamline integration to sort of see where are the streamlines in the vector field, and then we wanted to plot those. And so this is extremely easy with Bokeh. When I mentioned that all of these glyphs are vectorized, that includes this multi-line glyph, right? So the data here is actually not a vector of numbers, it's a vector of line data. So here we have, for instance, a list of points is maybe the conceptual way to imagine it, where each element in the list is really a list of points for one line. And so now we can simply pass those lists to multi-line, and we'll get all the lines sort of splattered all at once. And it's, again, a very nice, simple, conceptually unifying grammar of graphics type interface. Same thing for polygons, right? So here we have our patches glyph, which again takes now a vector of data, if you will, or the vector of data contains a vector of polygon data. So each element in the list is really a sequence of points defining some polygon. And again, we just pass all of that to the patches, right? So patches glyph here takes this vector of polygon data, x coordinates, and a vector of polygon data, y coordinates. We can specify the different fill colors there. In this case, the data I think is colored by some unemployment data for 2009 for Texas. We can set constant values for things like the fill alpha, so now every one of those polygons will have the same fill alpha. But we could have different fill alpha if we wanted to, right? We could pass in a column in our data source or a vector of data for the fill alpha, and then each polygon could have a different alpha value if we wanted to. So again, this sort of unifying concept of being able to splatter these glyphs across our visualizations. Last example here, histogram. This example actually is exactly the sort of one that's going to be made even simpler with our Bokeh.charts interface that's coming. We'll have sort of a schematic canned histogram function that you can do all kinds of nice things and lay out in interesting ways and do auto-faceting with, for instance, over multi-dimensional data sets. But here you can see, even already, it's still fairly simple to create a histogram with just the plotting.py interface. Here I use the quad glyph, so the quad is an axis-aligned rectangle, and I give it, the edges of my quads based on the result of my histogram binning, and then I simply show some lines that have my cumulative distribution function and my probability distribution function, and again, I just give it the x coordinates and I give it the y coordinates as well, and we set our properties and we go. So it's quite simple. Even with this plotting.py, again, this will become even simpler in the next, I don't know, say month or 2 months perhaps, when we get some of our Bokeh.charts integrated into Bokeh. So I think that's a couple of sort of detailed examples where we talk about the actual commands, just to sort of show off a few more of the different types of charts here. We can talk about, up in the upper left there is a chart, obviously again, another example of the patches glyph, but also of the wedge glyph as well. So we've now superimposed these sort of pie charts for every state, and so that kind of thing is very easy to express in Bokeh as well. In the center top there, we have a reproduction of a fairly famous chart by a guy named Burton, showing the efficacy of different antibiotics against different strains of bacteria. It's kind of a strange chart design. It has an inverted radial axis, which I've never seen before. I'm not sure I do that myself, but we just wanted to show off capability that we could reproduce this chart. So you can see that's a rendering of that chart produced in Bokeh there. On the left there is another reproduction of Mike Bostock's fantastic Les Miserables chart, where it shows sort of co-occurrences of different characters in the novel Les Mis. And so you can sort of get this example of what characters are interacting in the novel. And again, this has a nice hover tooltip that you can sort of hover over all the individual squares and get more information about each of those bits. Down the bottom, just some more examples. You can see we can do a quiver type plot. There's a segment glyph. In this case, we've taken our vector field data and we've used a segment glyph to vectorize that data over our plot. You can see all the different kinds of marker types that are available there in the center plot. Finally, you can see some sort of stacked areas. We've used sort of a nice color brewer color plot to show that nice stacked area plot. A few more. Unemployment chart, that's actually another reproduction of a really nice New York Times chart that shows U.S. unemployment over the last 6 or so decades. And again, this has a nice hover tooltip attached, so you can sort of drill down and get more information about each of those cells. Again, there's a box plot. Right now, a box plot requires a few commands from plotting.py. Again, box plots are obviously going to go into our Bokeh.charts interface, so those will become even easier to do. Another nice thing about Bokeh, the fact that it uses the canvas, is that it's very easy to integrate image data, right? So here, for instance, you can see our nice Mandelbrot example on the lower left. And so if you have image data, either scalar image data that you want to color map on the client or raw RGB data, it's much sort of easier to deal with that using the fact that we have the canvas. And so one of the examples, you can run that I don't know if we'll be able to run today for the webinar, but it's included there in the source checkout is a nice spectrogram, the sort of a rolling waterfall plot, and we use the ability to vectorize different images together to run that. And then finally here, the periodic table. This is an example of the sort of novel kind of visualization you can do again with Bokeh, right? So this is a Bokeh plot, right? All of the things that you see in this are Bokeh glyphs. We've got squares, we've got text glyphs that we can vectorize. We can set the different colors based on different parameters and have a column that sort of describes what the colors should be. Here again, you can see the use of some categorical axes as well. And we also have a hover tooltip. So I'll show this example live in a minute, and you can hover over any of those and get much more detailed drill down into all the different elements. And so that's the sort of kind of thing that you can do with Bokeh. Just a word about some of the stuff that's coming soon. I think we're targeting the next big release is going to be in probably right before SciPy. So it's a little bit longer release cycle this time, but we want to get in some of our work for abstract rendering from our academic collaborator Joseph Cottom. Again, some of this better layout system, auto-faceting, the Bokeh.charts interfaces, more tools. We're always looking to add more and better tools, as well as more Matplotlib compatibility. So we already have quite a bit of compatibility with Matplotlib, but we're switching over to use Jake Vanderplot's MPL D3 exporter, and that gives us a wide range of MPL compatibility. And from there, we can actually have ggplot, Seaborn, and Pandas compatibility, right? So you can create your plots using ggplot, but actually target Bokeh in the browser with a very, just a line or two different imports. You can automatically sort of have ggplot now become ggplot Bokeh, right? And generates Bokeh plots. Also language bindings. As I mentioned, we have Scala bindings that are sort of in a preliminary stage, and we also have interest in Julia. And the biggest thing coming, I think, is some widget interactors. So we're adding things like a hands-on table and drop-downs and charts, so you can interact with your plots not only through, standard sort of pan and zoom and selection tools, but you can actually have sort of widgets alongside your plot, more the notion of maybe of a Bokeh app. So anyway, that's a lot. I think I've already been talking for a while. So that's the last slide here, really just where to get more information. And you guys will have access to all these slides, by the way, as well as a recording of this. This webinar is going to be going up. They're all going to be at continuum.io/webinars. You can look there for this information. You can also look there for other webinars that are coming soon, right? So we'll be having an Excel and R integration webinars, and so that'll be updated continuously. Of course, the mailing list is a fantastic place to get information as well. We get more and more traffic on the mailing list. We're happy to see it, answer people's questions, and sort of help them with their use cases and get them going with Bokeh. As I mentioned, we're a company. We certainly have a big commitment to open source, but of course we do derive some revenue, and our ability to support these projects comes from our consulting. So if you have any interest in any or questions about possible consulting, also continuum.io/consulting is certainly a way to get a hold of us for that. And then finally, of course, bokeh.pydata.org is the main Bokeh site where you can go for, again, the interactive gallery, for the user guide, for examples and documentation. So there's quite a bit of extensive documentation for both the Python and the JavaScript side of Bokeh, and more is being added continuously. So I think that's all the slides that I have. Let me go ahead and drop down and quit out. And I want to go ahead and show some examples, but I think I do want to pause quickly and just see if there's any questions right now. So in order to keep things maybe simple, let's go ahead and do questions through chat, through the chat window. So if you do have any questions, maybe let's just take just a few minutes now. And we'll answer some questions. One second, let me resize my screen here. Okay, so do we support, the first question I see is, do we support geographical projections? And the answer is not currently, but that is in the pipeline. And by that I mean we don't support them automatically. So if you certainly have data that you can generate, and you can run that data through geographical projections to readjust the coordinates, you can certainly plot that using Bokeh. But there's no automatic way to sort of specify a projection and have that in the pipeline sort of automatically. That is on our to-do list. We have a big to-do list, but that's something that's going to be coming. I'm not quite sure what the time frame for that is, but I'd like to have that. It's not going to be the next release, so maybe the one after that is sort of the time frame where we can try to adjust and spend some time to develop that. It's certainly on our radar, absolutely. Okay, other questions? Okay, so the question is about Bokeh server and streaming and sort of how does that work. That's a really good question. So first I want to be clear that you don't have to use the Bokeh server. So you can use Bokeh to generate plots in the IPython notebook where all the data is embedded. You can use it to create standalone HTML files where all the data is embedded. You can use it to create HTML script tags plus a sidecar JavaScript file that has all the data for your plot. And you can display all of these static plots in the browser. And by static, I just mean that the data is not updating. You can still have zoom and pan tools. You can still have, for instance, linked panning and linked zooming. You can still have linked selections, for instance, between plots. So all of that is perfectly fine. It's just you won't have sort of streaming and updating data. That's what I mean by static. But if you'd like to have the ability to sort of stream data, we do have a Bokeh server, and again, this is in the GitHub repository. It's part of the Bokeh project. It's open source. You can run your own Bokeh server, or once we get a cloud version stood up, you're welcome to use that as well. But it's basically you connect to the Bokeh server, and I'll show off how to do that here in a minute. And then you tell it, I want to publish my plot to this server, and then there's a few different ways you can have your document look at that. We have a very nice embedding API that's about to be up in the next release that allows you to get a tag that references that server, that auto-loads Bokeh.js, and then displays your plot. And so again, if the data on the server updates, that automatically causes the rendered plot in the browser to update as well. The details of that, there's quite a lot that goes into that. We have a REST API for sharing the documents, for sharing the objects, but of course there's a WebSocket connection as well to be able to do the updates. So I'm not going to go too much into detail about that, but hopefully that's enough information. Where does Bokeh read the data from? That's a good question. So right now it's really more of a push model. So you're able to push whatever data you want to into the server. So for instance, if you had a Django app, you could be reading in data from a stock feed or a financial feed or from some sensors, and then you would push that data into, you would update your data, and then you would tell that you want to sync that data into the Bokeh server, and then from that the plot would update. So it's really at this point sort of a push model. That's a good question. So another question here is how on the server side do you get a list of the items that are selected for the box select tool. So that's an area that exists right now. There is the plumbing there. It's an area we also need some more improvement from. Right now there's a pull method. So for instance, I mentioned that you push data into the Bokeh server and that updates the plot. That actually goes two ways. If you, for instance, make a selection on a particular plot, that's going to push the list of indices back into the Bokeh server, and then you can get that. And right now you have to do that explicitly with a .pull method to sort of get that back. But we are going to be adding some capabilities so that you can, for instance, just add a callback that gets called automatically whenever the selection changes. So that also is coming again in the near future. But the plumbing is all there. So again, right now you can do it. There's a pull method. I see if I can find an example of showing that off here in a bit. But yeah, hopefully that answers the question. Other questions? Okay, the question is how far away is SVG or PDF format? I don't think it's a lot of work. I think it's a little bit of one of those sort of tedious type tasks. I mean, we have all the renderers. It's a fairly easy place to stick in, I think, the code to do it. It's just a matter of doing it. I really don't think it'll be in the next release right before SciPy, but the release after that, the sort of 0.6 release, maybe later towards the end of the summer, it might be a good realistic time frame. We have a lot of stuff to get in before SciPy, and we want to make a pretty big announcement then. So I don't think it'll be in this 0.5 release right before SciPy, which is at the beginning of July, but hopefully maybe August or even September time frame, which I know is a little while away. But it is definitely a priority for us to be able to get in SVG. We've had it, people have asked about it. Asked about getting that put in, and it's certainly a priority for us. And it's not hard work. It's just it's a chunk of work to sort of go through all the different renderers and add a second back end for them. But that's hopefully answers the question. Okay. Yeah, is there a tool? So the question is about zoom tools and can visualizations be resampled at different zooms? And that's exactly the downsampling capability that I talked about earlier. So that's kind of one of the newer aspects of Bokeh, and I would say a little bit of a moving target or work in progress. But currently, what you can do is, for instance, yes, exactly. So if you're zoomed all the way out, you get sort of a coarse set of data sent to the browser, because obviously you don't want to send gigabytes of data to the browser. As you zoom in, it actually makes a request, and it sends back a new finer grained set of data for the particular area that you zoomed in on. If you zoom in again, that happens as well. So that's a little bit more work setting that up right now, and that's one area where we'd love to get feedback from people using that and trying that out to sort of smooth down any rough edges that it has. But that's absolutely a big priority for us. Abstract rendering also touches on this a bit. If you have a large data set and you want to be able to view it, abstract rendering is another way. The work of Joseph Cottom that might help with those sort of large, big data sets as well. But that's definitely one of the primary motivations for developing Bokeh is sort of to be able to handle that particular use case. Now, that said, there's a lot of sort of foundational work we had to lay just to be able to get here at all, and so that's sort of the point we're at now. Is we're finally at a point where we can add these nice sort of big data downsampling abstract rendering capabilities. So some of that's going to be coming in 0.5. Some of it's already in, and it'll be improved in 0.5 in the next 6 weeks or so. And again, feedback from people about use cases is absolutely the best way for us to get feedback and to move forward, right? I mean, that's the best way to sort of sharpen our tools, is sort of bang them against other people's problems, right? And so, feedback from you guys is incredibly valuable to us and helps us definitely drive the direction of the short and long-term Bokeh roadmap. Okay. Let's see. Tentative time frame for the high-level charts functionality. I'm hoping to get a good chunk of that in before SciPy, so in the 0.5 release. That's my goal, is to get that in. So I would say, again, the SciPy is the week of, I think, July 5th, and we'll try to have it released fairly shortly right before SciPy. And I'm looking to get in a good chunk of that. Again, the things to work on there, adding a much better layout system. So we're going to use a really nice implementation of the Cassowary layout algorithm and base things upon that. And then once we've got that, we can do all these nice sort of auto-faceting and again, stacked axes and that sort of thing as well. So I would say some of that, if not all of it, should be in by around the early July timeframe before SciPy. Okay. Is there support for graphs or network viz? So that's the sort of thing that you can certainly do, quote unquote, by hand in Bokeh right now. There's no automatic support for sort of knowing about network data. That's also on my roadmap. If you go into the GitHub, tracker, you can find there's an issue about that. It's been around for a little while. It's just a matter of prioritizing and finding, when we can actually devote resources to these different features we'd like to have, because we want to have a lot of features. So that's definitely on my, on the list of things to do. But currently, right now you would have, for instance, there's nothing to do the graph layout for you, right? So if you had something that can do the layout for you, you can certainly plot all of the lines and the glyphs using Bokeh, but there's nothing in Bokeh right now that would do the layout, given some graph data, do the layout for me. And so that's what's not in there yet.
Hey, Brian, if I may just chime in real quick. With regard to, hi, this is Peter. This is Peter, everyone. Hi. I just wanted to chime in real quick that with regards both to the earlier question about the geo-projections and also I think with graphs, it's relevant to mention that even though we don't use SVG and D3 as a rendering backend and we're using Canvas, we can actually reuse a lot of the code that's there for the force-directed layouts, for things like the topical JSON type stuff. A lot of that work is very good, and it's actually relatively independent of the D3 SVG sort of like the DOM manipulation stuff. And so we definitely been keeping an eye on that, and I think there's a lot of good potentials for interop between that and Bokeh.js. So just so people have clear understanding, you're not really waiting on us to reinvent everything from scratch here. It's more of figuring out the right APIs on the Python side and making sure we can reflect those accurately into first-class scene graph objects on the JavaScript side. And that also sort of dovetails with the Bokeh.chart stuff. Brian, you mentioned that we're looking at a pre-SciPy sort of release that includes the first cut of that, but master is moving very quickly. So I think probably within the next 2 or 3 weeks, we should have the beginnings of that chart interface starting to show up. And that would be a great time for people to submit, try it out, check it out, and play with it and give us feedback on what they would like that API to look like.
Awesome. Yeah. So thanks, Peter. So again, that's Peter Wang. That's my boss. That's the president here of Continuum Analytics, and really the first sort of author and inventor of Bokeh, or the first person to think it up. A couple more questions here, and then I think we'll maybe try to dive down into some examples. So let's see. First question here is, what is a data cube? Sorry, I probably should have explained some terminology. In the case where I mentioned data cube, it really is just a big 3D cube of data, right? So you can imagine a giant 3-dimensional array. And the particular example we had was sort of ocean temperature data. So you can imagine a sort of lat-lon level of data, and then across several years. So the dimensions were sort of latitude, longitude, and years, and then at each one of those points there was sort of an ocean temperature. And so this was, I think, the example we have is a 4-gigabyte data cube, and so if you can sort of zoom into different parts of the globe and get the data to update. So that's one example we have. Other questions here, we're going to change the open source status of Bokeh in the future. There is no plans at all to ever change the open source status of Bokeh. It's possible that we might find some other, we'd love to do consulting around Bokeh if people want to use it on projects. It certainly might be possible that we might develop a cloud hosting type service or something around Bokeh that we could, potentially drive income for. But the library itself, Bokeh, there are no plans for it to be anything other than open source, and I can't see any reasons we would change the licensing either. It's BSD clause 3 right now, and I think that's what it probably will always be. So.
And there's nothing we can do about that either. Like if we were to try to change the licensing model future on, BSD is BSD, right? So, but the main thing is actually to that point, any of the open source projects we do at Continuum, we do them very intentionally as open source, not just lightly or by default. Because we've intentionally done other things as closed source as well. Our products like the GPU compiler and IO Pro, there's things that we have paid plans on Wapari. We do a mix of these things. But we are very intentional about making sure that a lot of innovative stuff happens in the open source side. We think that's fundamentally healthier for the ecosystem, and it just sort of enriches everyone. And that is sort of a core company value. So I know that there's a lot of distrust now. People, see freemium models around libraries. But our goal here, and actually our charter with the DARPA investment too, is that things need to be in the open source, and that aligns with our company vision.
Okay, good question. So I think I'm going to go at least to have a chance to show off a few examples here, or talk about maybe some examples in the gallery and play around with them. Maybe run a few examples again from the IPython notebook or from the server examples that we have here, just because those are hard to sort of see just staring at the GitHub checkout. So we'll go through those, and then again we might have time for some more questions here at the end. But let's go ahead and take a look. So right now I have open again the gallery page at bokeh.pydata.org. If you just go to the main Bokeh page, you can see here, again, we have a user guide, a dev guide, information about contributing. We also have lots of reference information as well. But of particular interest here is this and a tutorial. Sorry, I should mention, there's a really nice tutorial. I presented at a couple of different conferences. It has a lot of different exercises for you to, sort of work through and to complete. Let me actually show that right quick. So if you go to some of the basic exercises, you can see, for instance, here is a partially implemented script that has steps for you to figure out. And you can go to, for instance, the solution, and you can see, here's the completed work that you need to work on to sort of do, as well as the actual live plots, right? So this is the plot that you should be generating with the code that's generated at the bottom. And so this is actually an example I can sort of show. Here I've got my pan tool. I can sort of shift zoom in. I can use a box zoom to zoom in. I can hit my reset tool, of course, to reset the view. You can actually resize the plot, and we're working on making this a bit easier as well, with like a draggable hot corner. Right now, you sort of have to hit this resize button, but that'll be better in the future. But there is this nice resize capability, which I think is somewhat unique. Again, preview save right now, you can get a, let me turn off the resize tool. Preview save now, you can get a nice PNG kind of output. Definitely, again, SVG backend or D3 backend to generate SVG. Not something we have done yet, but is definitely on our radar and our roadmap long term. So that's an example tutorial. I encourage you all to check that out if you have specific examples. There's all kinds of exercises here. Just to give you some idea, I delivered a 3-hour tutorial recently, and I maybe got through half the material. So there's a lot of material here for you to check through and sort of learn by doing. Has some guided exercises to work you along. But also the gallery is a great place as well. So if we go to the gallery, you can just sort of see different kinds of plots, and you can maybe click on a plot and say, how do I generate that? What is the code for generating that different kind of plot? We're going to be adding to this, as we go on more and more. I'd love to see, many tens or dozens more examples added to the gallery. This is sort of a common one we show, this sort of color map scatter plot. Again, you can see the code at the bottom. The entire code is very, very short here, right? There's a few imports at the top for things like NumPy. Here we create some random XY points, we create some random radiuses, we create some random vector of colors here. We have this line output file. We're telling we want to create an actual file, a standalone HTML file with this plot and the data incorporated into it. And then we simply call scatter. So there's a scatter function that scatters by default circles at the X and Y positions, with the radius, which is now a variable, with the alpha, which is set to be a constant value here, with the colors, the fill colors, which are variable. We turn off the line color. And that's the plot we get in. So then again, we can sort of interact with this, and we can zoom in. All the tools just sort of come there by default. You can select or add other tools as well whenever you create the plot. So that's sort of a common example we show. Let's see another one here. What's next one? Let's show maybe the Les Mis plot here. So again, this is an example of using categorical axes. So here, instead of having simple number sort of real line type axes, we have this nice categorical axes where all the coordinates are really these different categories. And again, there's a little bit of code here, but the actual plotting code at the bottom is very small. It starts where it says figure here. At the top, we have some code to actually deal with the data, sort of read in the data, and create this, these co-occurrent sort of matrix. But then, starting from column data source and figure, the actual code is fairly small, and most of it's actually to do with styling. Really, we just want to splat a bunch of rectangles right across our plot. And so there we say that we want to use the xname field from our column data source. So here we can see xname is the x coordinate, and we can see there's an xname field in our column data source up here at the top. And so that's sort of correspondence. So we can give yname for our y coordinates, and yname is also a field in our column data source. And so we pass in these parameters for rect, and sure enough, we have a sort of a splatter plot of rectangles all over our plot. And again, there's a nice hover tool, so we can sort of drill down and get some indication of more information about that. Maybe a better example of the hover tool is actually the elements plot here. And let me go ahead and find that. Here we go, the periodic table. So here again, there's a hover tool. In this case, we can actually really drill down and see we can add a lot more information to the hover tooltip. And so here, for instance, we have not just the stuff that's listed on the screen, but we have additional columns that show up. So here, for instance, the atomic mass, we have the color that shows up. We have a nice color swatch there as well. We have some other additional information. So these are all fields that are in our column data source, and so we can express those and view those using a tooltip. Okay, so take a look at a few more things. Again, preview save works here as well. Again, we can certainly plot that out, and of course our resize tool, let us sort of resize that down to whatever size we want. So anyway, that's really good. So I'll put that off. Great. So maybe take a look at just another couple of examples here. Also image plots, right? So here's an example of an image plot. In this case, we're going to do the color mapping actually on the browser side. So here we have just an array, a 2D array of scalar data. Here it's just sine times cosine, and we send this data to to the image glyph, and then we tell it we want to give it a palette, and so that will actually cause it to be color mapped in the browser. It is possible to actually send raw RGBA data if you have the data color mapped already. It's possible to send that. Note that this image glyph is vectorized, just like all the other points. If you want to, scatter a bunch of circles, you give a bunch of X and Y coordinates to circles, and you can also scatter a bunch of images all in one go with the image glyph. You can sort of give a vector of images. And again, this turns out to be surprisingly useful sometimes. If you go out and check the videos for some of the PyData tutorials that I've given, you can see in there me showing off the spectrogram demo, which again is sort of a running waterfall plot. Which shows live audio being turned into a spectrogram, and we do that by splatting a bunch of images to the screen, so we can avoid redrawing, and so it's actually quite nice. Okay, what else to show off here? I think actually I want to drop down to the console and show off some of the Bokeh server examples and some of the IPython notebook examples. So let me bring up a console here, and hopefully that is big enough to see. Let me actually. Okay, so there was a question of full screen, but I think I'm actually about to drop down into the console. So let me take a look and make sure we can see. Is this font big enough for everyone? Can people sort of see what I'm doing? Okay, great. Okay, so I'm going to CD into my Bokeh source checkout, and again, this is just the GitHub checkout. There's an examples directory here. If you install Bokeh with Conda, using the Conda package manager or Anaconda, all of these examples actually come with the package, and you can run them, and so they're there sort of for you to run. But you can also get them from the GitHub checkout as well. So we can see in here there's actually a lot of different examples. So for instance, actually, first thing I want to show maybe is some of the ggplot or Seaborn type examples, right? So here, Seaborn, if you're not familiar with it, is a library for sort of statistical plotting in Python that generates very attractive sort of graphs, right? So one idea is that, the standard matplotlib defaults are maybe not the most sort of attractive colors and visual schemes available. So Seaborn has some customized visual schemes that are much more attractive, but also some canned statistical plots as well, like a violin plot. So let me go ahead and run Python violin.py here. And we'll take a look at the plot, and then we'll go ahead and take a look at, I realize this is the problem with working in main, actually. So git checkout, let me check out the actual version that I want to demo. Might help, sorry. I had the code that was too new in my repository. So let's try that again with python violin.py. And so here we see a nice violin plot. And this has actually been improved. So in master, we have better matplotlib support. We actually see the different quartiles displayed horizontally across these different violin plots. So this is the previous release, Bokeh 0.4.4, but in master there's already improvements to this that really show things a little bit better. But you can see the code for this if I cat the file, violin.py here. You can see it's quite short, right? I import Seaborn as normally. I create my snf.violin plot. And then I just do pyplot.show Bokeh, right? And so that actually converts my Seaborn plot directly into a Bokeh plot that targets the browser. And here again, I've specified that I want a file name. I want to output to a sort of a standalone file. And if we look here, sure enough, there's a violin.html. So that's a completely transportable file. We can pick that up and move it or serve it or whatever we want to do. All the data is contained therein. This is not an example using the server. Sometimes the server is really nice, and sometimes you want to have a standalone file. And you can get both of those with Bokeh, so that's great. Going up again, same thing with ggplot here. We have, this matplotlib gives us a nice way to have all of these hooks and to use this. So maybe a quick one to show would be this XKCD. If you're not familiar with it, this was kind of a fun one. Someone added an XKCD sort of format to ggplot or an MPL, and so we can generate sort of plots in the style of XKCD. And so that works just fine as well. So again, that's, this matplotlib interface compatibility layer is a bridge for us to support all kinds of tools that already exist in the Python ecosystem. I think that's a very valuable thing to have. Let's see. So we'll take a look at
Can you go ahead and show the interactivity? Can you go ahead and show the interactivity with that?
Oh yeah, that's great. Yeah, let me go back to ggplot here.
And to reiterate, all these when we say static standalone HTML files, they have all of the Bokeh.js JavaScript code embedded. So even if you ship that static HTML file to someone, that other person on the receiving end will still be able to interact and resize and pan and zoom and whatever other behaviors are baked in. That's sort of, even with a static HTML file, it's still dynamic plots.
Yeah, very good, very good. Okay, there was a question that just came across, how do I discover all the palettes? And I think that may actually be an omission in the docs. I apologize for that. But to answer your question briefly, right now we basically have all of the Color Brewer palettes. So if you go to Color Brewer, all the different brewer palettes are available. I'll try to have the docs updated maybe later on today, even with a little bit more information about what palette, the explicit list of palettes that are available. We're also, of course, going to be adding the ability to construct your own palette. So that's something else that probably should go in 0.5 is the ability to sort of specify your own palette or to construct them from maybe a linear or other different kinds of description functions. So thank you for pointing that out. That's a sort of a missing oversight. If you do want to go into the code and sort of see where those are available, if you do a checkout, let's see, you can look in palettes.py. Should have a list. So if I open up palettes.py here, so if you want to do a GitHub checkout, you can sort of see, here's my brewer dictionary, it has the names, and you can sort of see all the different palettes that are there. So we'll improve our documentation around that, and I thank you very much for pointing that out. So, okay, so that's some examples there. Let's go ahead and find some server examples. Server here, plotting interface, and we want to go to server, and if we take a look at this, let me take a look, what's a good one here. So the first thing I need to do is actually run the Bokeh server, so let me go ahead and do that as well. So here I'm going to run Bokeh server, and so now it's running. It's, it uses sort of Redis, can use Redis as a persistent backend. It can also use Python shell, or it can have an in-memory backend. Might be adding more different persistence backends as time goes on. Redis is sort of one of the defaults. It's nice, but it's a little bit harder to get up and running on Windows. So that's why we added some other availabilities for backends as well. And we're going to go ahead and plot some plots. So let's see what's a good one. So I'll just plot this Burton.py example first. And so this is actually on the server. So this view that's brought up is sort of the default Bokeh server view, and I just get a list of my documents here. You can actually go down and see all of these different documents explicitly, one-on-one. This is just to sort of give you a list of all of the documents. So we'll take a look at that. There's Burton. Let me do Python line animate here. And this one you can see. Right? So it's actually changing the data. And if you actually go look at the code, I'll bring it up here in a second, you can see what's going on. But again, we can still interact with this. All of that works fine. I can reset my view. I can do a box zoom around different points, and all of that works okay. And if we actually take a look at the code, take a look at the code. Let me go ahead and stop that one. We can take a look at what that looks like and then maybe show a notebook example. Line animate here. So .py, that didn't open up. Sometimes Sublime Text doesn't open up on the first try. So here what we do is we call output server. So before we saw an example, we called output file. We want to output a standalone file. In this case, we want to actually publish the plot to a server with the document name output, the document name line animate. And so right now it just uses some defaults, but if you're running your own server, you could point this at a different server. We go ahead and create a plot that has this line in it. We create it pointing at these two different aspects of the data source, X and Y. And then we simply have this loop at the end, right? So we simply update the data. So again, right now it's sort of a push model. And this has actually been cleaned up as well. So right now you can see it's sort of setting the data, and then it's setting this dirty flag, and then it's saying to store the objects. That's already been cleaned up in master. There's already a nicer, cleaner interface for that. But then we simply have this loop. It simply updates the data. So you can see it simply adds new data and updates the data. And as soon as the data on the data source changes in the server, the plot automatically reacts to that. So there we go. So that's an example of that. Let me go ahead and open up some of the notebook examples as well. I'm going to make sure to get to some of those first. So if I go to plotting notebook.
Just Brian, one thing I want to point out, because I'm on the other end here monitoring the actual webinar, and some of the animation and some of the interactions, depending on your bandwidth, as you're watching this, just all the attendees here, they may seem a little chunky, but actually when you're playing with it, it's very, very smooth. So just as a heads up, like because I noticed a little bit of chunking on my end, but it's because of the wireless where I'm at. It's not because that's actually, the interaction speed with Bokeh. It's actually very, very fluid and smooth.
Yeah, definitely encourage everyone to play around with these examples. Yourself again. Definitely, there could be some bandwidth issues. As I was looking in front of me, it was a very smooth animation. That sine curve moving up and down, and there was no sort of hesitation or pause at all. So, okay. So let's take a look at a couple of notebook examples. There is nice integration with the notebook. Here, what's a good one to bring up? I'll bring up maybe the box plot first. We can take a look here. We can run some code. So if I just do cell run all. Here I can get my box plot, and again I can hit preview save down here and get that as well. Let's maybe take a look at some of the different examples. Since I have a server up and running, let's find animated. Here we go. So this is a nice one people like to see. So again, here we're going to draw some wedges, some annular wedges, and then we have a nice loop here that's sort of computing some new data and pushing that to the data source. So I'm going to go ahead and do cell run all, and if we get down at the bottom, we get this nice plot. So hopefully everyone get a chance to see that. Again, I encourage you to sort of check it out. Yeah, so I'm looking at a screen next to me, and I can see that the animation looks quite chunky. It's actually very fluid and smooth. The update rate, is about a tenth of a second actually, and it's sort of a very nice smooth. So apologize if there's sort of maybe bandwidth issues. Maybe it makes this look sort of chunky, but I encourage you guys to check it out. Not sort of over a full screen webinar. You should see it move much smoother. So that's an example of that. And again, the main idea here is we store our data in this data source, and then we can update the data, and if we update the data, the plot automatically updates. So I'll close that one page, we'll close our box plot, maybe a few more here from, of course, link brushing is a good one as well. So in this one, plots are a bit big. Let me see if I can make these a little bit smaller.
You can also make your browser window bigger, right? Or is that?
Yeah, that's true. I could do that as well. Make it a little bit bigger. Okay, so anyway, but if I put the selection tool on here, we can see automatically, that selects the points with the corresponding indices on the other plot. And so this actually happens without a Python server, right? So that's another important point to stress, is that the server is really fantastic for streaming and updating data, but a lot of the tools, like even link panning and link selection, those things don't necessarily require a server at all. And a lot of the widget work that we're adding is not going to require a server. So you can basically publish sort of an interactive, Bokeh app that doesn't require running an IPython kernel or any kind of Python kernel in the background at all. And I think that's a very powerful sort of feature. If the data is available to the plot because it's embedded or whatever, then you can have access to all of these tools even without a Bokeh server running. So yeah. So anyway, that's I think a good example. I think there's another question. Okay, someone says that they're doing some things so fast they aren't visible. So one thing that's nice is that there will be a recording of this webinar that goes up, and I think all of the actual, all of the actual things that I showed will be much more sort of fluid in that webinar because they'll be recorded from here locally. So if you are having a problem seeing some stuff, let me know and I can sort of go back. Right, so the question, so yeah, I'll go back. But there was a question here about which object you need to pull on. So there's something called a data source that we need to pull on. So here you can see I've configured a data source, a column data source. Here I've added some data to it. But if you wanted to get selections back, you could do a source.pull, right? And so that would make that work. So I think we're running just about towards the end of our time. I'm not sure if there's any other examples to sort of show off right quick. Let me take a look. Another one here. This was actually donated. Love to get examples of plots to add to our gallery from other contributors. So this was actually, some user at Bokeh contributed this. It's called a random walk example. And so it's just generating a random walk. It's updating the data on the server. And so you can sort of see that, evolve over time. So if you guys do use Bokeh and you develop some interesting novel visualization or something that you'd like to share, we're more than happy to put, new examples in our gallery, put them, in the repository if you'd like them to be made available for other people to learn from, and we'd love to get those contributions. So I think that's good. Any other questions, though, before? Okay. So if there aren't any more questions, I think I'll maybe turn it over to Peter if you want to have any sort of closing final remarks.
Not particularly. I guess I want to thank everyone for showing up and listening to all this, and I would encourage you to definitely. Even if you don't want to, I know checking out code and actually running it is a little bit of a hurdle for some people. But if you're using Anaconda, you can literally just do conda install Bokeh or conda update Bokeh, and you'll have it all. But even if you don't want to do that, you can at least go to bokeh.pydata.org. And I want to reiterate that all of the examples linked off the main page in the gallery, they're interactive right there, so you can kind of play with them. As Brian mentioned, things that are coming down the pike include widgets, include some dashboarding related things. Kind of a friendlier charting interface for those who want more canned plots and less of the novel sort of compositional kind of things. And then also, one thing I would just reiterate, in a lot of the discussions I see on Hacker News or on, the Python subreddit, there's a lot of innovation currently happening in Python visualization and also web-based visualization in general. And it's important to stress that Bokeh is actually, the project has kind of a 4-year scope. And so we're just getting started, and we're trying to deliver useful, and I think that we are delivering useful tools for the community right now. But our vision is actually towards having interactive visualization over very large data sets through the browser and from Python. So that is a fairly, I think, ambitious goal, and a lot of the build-out is going to happen on the server side. Some of it's visible, some of it's in the architecture and the plumbing. Those things don't, show up a lot when people are just on the surface level comparing, how is this different than D3, or how is this relative to some of the other libraries that are out there. And the key things I want to stress about Bokeh are, we're just getting started. I think we're already doing some very, very cool things that are actually unique in terms of the capability. Being able to have the same library generate both static standalone HTML, as well as being able to run your own server inside your firewall or inside your own environment, to being able to integrate all of it smoothly with the IPython notebook. So across the board, we're doing a number of things that are quite unique to have all these capabilities in one library. But we're just getting started. So we'd love to hear more from the community. We'd love to hear more from people who are actually using it, whether on the mailing list or on Twitter. And you can really help us mold the features that we prioritize. So we'd love to get your feedback and input.
Okay, great. So I know I said those were final words. A couple of last questions did come in. I want to answer them and address them, and then I'll sort of say goodbye. One question I see here, plans for 3D and WebGL. It's not impossible that we could move to a WebGL backend at some point, and it's not even impossible that we could add built-in support for 3D pipelines, but that's definitely not on sort of the short or even medium-term plan. I couldn't give any estimate for when that might happen. Other questions here about Bokeh Server and Python 3, that's actually a really good question. So Bokeh Server does currently use gEvent, which means you'll have degraded performance on Python 3. You can basically publish plots to the server, but the interactivity, the streaming stuff isn't going to work with Python 3. We're looking at using perhaps Tornado instead of gEvent, and I'm not sure what the time frame for that is either. I would say somewhere maybe around the 06 time frame is sort of when that might be available. Question about doing the big downsampling, and that, as I mentioned, that's one of the newest features that's been added. If you do want to try that out, I really encourage you to go to the Bokeh mailing list and contact us there, and we'll sort of help step you through. That's going to require maybe a little bit of an explanation and maybe hearing about your particular use case and setup, and we'll get you up and running. But that'll help us make it better, and so we'd love to get that kind of feedback and question. And then finally, one other comment regarding the Python 3 question is actually, I don't know how many people here are using PyPy, but actually Bokeh doesn't rely, it understands and consumes data frames and NumPy arrays and all this stuff, but it doesn't require the use of them. I mean, we can actually run with PyPy, and so PyPy NumPy is actually supported by Bokeh. So if you have a PyPy stack or some of your web serving stuff, you can actually use Bokeh in that. Yep. Okay, and last question here was about, is it possible to create an Anaconda environment with Conda that includes the current master? So we don't currently have any automated generating of like Conda nightly packages. I think that actually would be great to add. We do have some integration with Travis CI, and we could probably automate some building of Conda packages. That said, you can certainly create a Conda environment that has, Python and SciPy and NumPy and Pandas and whatever you want, and then you can just Python setup. I do Python setup.py develop, or you can do Python setup.py install from a checkout of Bokeh from GitHub. I will say, if you want to build, there are a few things to sort of build. You have to sort of have a JS stack, and so I think actually adding sort of nightly packages would be a really awesome idea. So thank you for that wonderful idea. I'm not sure when we'll get to that, but I think maybe in the near future we might try to create some Conda packages automatically that we can put up on a BinStar channel, and anyone that wants to have sort of nightlies of Bokeh can get those. I think that's actually not a bad idea. So good questions. So I'd like to thank you, everyone that's here, for spending an hour with us this afternoon, sort of hear about Bokeh and talk about Bokeh and ask us these great questions. Just want to reiterate that feedback from users is there's nothing better, there's nothing more valuable to me in terms of making Bokeh better and shaping its direction. So I really would love to get any and all feedback from you guys. What can we make better, what's missing, and work and go forward. And of course, if you're interested in contributing, of course, pull requests are always welcome as well. So apart from that, I think I just want to say, again, goodbye and thanks. And all of this stuff will be available on continuum.io/webinars, the slides and the recording. And if you have any questions, please mail us on the mailing list. Thanks, guys.
Thanks for presenting, Brian.